Not a problem. The next conversation is how the pandemic has changed our newsrooms. You know, we have got all used to be sitting in a virtual environment, working it out, taking newspapers, running news shows from there. So, and we have got used to it. So is a physical newsroom a space worth fighting for? How the dynamics have changed? We have got 4 wonderful editors to talk it through. Can I have on stage Naresh Fernandez from The Scroll, Meenal Baghel from Hindustan Times, Mukesh Mathur, the state editor of Dainik Bhaskar, and Deepal from the Vibes of India. So we have 2 digital journalists and 2 print people.
I'm Deepal, and we have 3 wonderful editors with us. Naresh Fernandez, who edits Scroll. Like all of us are aware about how independent and original and inclusive Scroll is. The inimitable Meenal Baghel, with whom I've had the pleasure to work for Mirror. She is right now the executive editor with Hindustan Times. And we have Mukesh Mathur, जो दैनिक भास्कर के state editor है. We will be talking about how newsrooms have changed post-COVID, and it's worth fighting for a physical newsroom. So first of all, I would want to know about your perspectives about how the newsroom has changed post-COVID. Thank you.
So, you know, the morning after lockdown, nothing seemed to have changed at Scroll. We have colleagues scattered across the country, and so our primary mode of communication has always been our morning and our evening conference. And I just realized that sort of technology has changed so much since lockdown that we were actually using a conference call every day. Now everything's sort of Zoom and everybody's moved to Google Meets. And we always had our morning edit call at 10:05. And so we couldn't, suddenly a colleague, I remember we did it at 10:05 because at 10 o'clock, a lot of corporate clients were using the service and we could never get on. So we decided to move to 10:05. So 10:05, the morning after lockdown, we have our call. And when you're an online publication, you don't have layouts to do. You don't look over people's shoulders. Everybody is uploading their stories themselves and putting in the pictures. And so it all seemed hunky-dory, and we thought, you know, this was the ideal world. And then, as the day progressed, we realized, oh, maybe it's not such a good idea to be the sort of virtual newsroom, but also be the small organization that we are. You know, the problem with Scroll is that I work with all these people who are very environmentally and socially conscious. And sort of everybody's a public transport advocate. And we realized that between us in all of these cities, we owned 3 bicycles, but nobody had a car. And there were no taxi services to be hired. We couldn't get around suddenly. So that was one of the problems suddenly that came up. Our video colleagues needed equipment. You have big computers that you couldn't use. And once we moved their computers home, we realized that home landline, sort of broadband services are not good enough for video. So that took a little while to work out. Still, you know, you were sitting at home, you were working in the comfort of home, you didn't have to go anywhere. What could be the better life? Then we realized, of course, that especially in cities like Bombay and Delhi, a lot of people don't have a private space to work in at home. The office for some people was a space of refuge just to get away from the chaos, but other people sort of it was physically impossible for them to work at home. And so as sort of now that we don't have this fear of infection, we're back in offices. And also the other problem we faced was that we realized that even, for a long time, the team that started out when at lockdown, we knew each other, we were very comfortable. And so the conference call was fantastic. But then 2 years into this, some people had gone to study, some people had moved on to other projects, and it's much more difficult to incorporate new colleagues when you're online. At the junior most level, sometimes you just need to look over somebody's shoulder and say, this is how it's done, that's not the way it's done. And when you try to do it by email, you completely lose tonality. And so when you're trying to tell somebody something, it could seem really harsh on email, though, if you were in a newsroom, you would almost make it jokey. And so training is the other problem, which is almost very difficult in the virtual newsroom. And so now I think we've realized that we need a hybrid model. Not everybody needs to come in every day, but it would be nice to see people occasionally. And that's when you sort of really have this alchemy, where you have people talking about their stories, but also talking about things at random, which spark other ideas. And the energy that you get in a physical space by seeing people really is what you need newsrooms for.
That was wonderful, and especially the point that, and this I think concerns junior journalists more, that or even senior journalists in cosmopolitan cities where space is a constraint, because we've had lots of colleagues complaining of back pain and stuff like that, because homes, usually we're not acquainted or we don't have the adequate furniture to function, Meenal, can you share your experiences of, how it has been to lead a newsroom in the pandemic times?
So I used to edit Mumbai Mirror when the pandemic began, and we were the first newspaper to, even before the Times of India, we share the same office, the same owners. Even before the Times of India, we were the first newspaper to go completely work from home. And it was actually very seamless in how we managed to do it. Through the 2 years of the pandemic, we worked from home, we worked remotely. But in the December of 2020, the management announced that they would be shutting down the paper. And that was very interesting, because an announcement that I would have liked to make in person to my colleagues had to be made online. And there were people we were letting go. We'd been working as a team for 15 years, and here I was talking to people on Zoom and telling them that the paper they had worked for, that they'd lost their jobs, and it was all on Zoom. And that's when you realize the extreme limitations of working on Zoom, and that you're not there to comfort somebody, to share what you really want to say. So that brought home to me very starkly the limitations of working from home and working offline. So when I started working for Hindustan Times about 6 weeks ago, my first thing was that anyway, the pandemic situation is much better, but it was very, very important. This was going to be a completely new team. As Naresh mentioned, that when you're an old team, you can afford to go offline because everybody knows the requirement, the dynamic. Whereas with a new team, your ideas are not necessarily understood in the way that they need to be understood. So the first thing that we did is that we opened the newsroom after 2 years at Hindustan Times. And even though we had about 4 or 5 COVID cases after we opened the newsroom, and we are in a mask 12 hours a day in the office, and that's mandatory, but not one person said that they would like to work from home. Because for people, office is not just a place, and in Bombay it's really difficult to commute. People come from really far off. But again, as Naresh mentioned, that office can also be a place of refuge, it can be a place of comradeship, and where really ideas, I'll just give one example before I conclude that, for instance, the jumbo centers, the field hospitals in Bombay, which was such an imaginative intervention in public health in the city, were all shut down yesterday. Now, it is very possible that it could have just gone as like a 3-para news. But then because we were in office, somebody mentioned that how their sister was admitted, and we just got talking, and then we said, let's just do a much larger, longer story on this intervention, and it just became a much better story only because we were in office, some conversations sparked ideas, and so I think it's very important to create that alchemy which comes from being in office, and especially for newsrooms, because our work is so dependent on interaction with people.
Thank you, Meenal. Like what you said, especially since I see so many young and budding journalists sitting here, I think, as you rightly said, that a physical newsroom is very important for people to connect, collaborate, and brainstorm ideas, and for young journalists to evolve. But do you think that after working so long from home, are journalists or were journalists in your newsroom reluctant, any of them, demanding that this system, since corporates still have that system of working from home, you think that journalists also fall into that category where some people, I was just going through a Reuters research which said that productivity actually increased because morning meetings often promote hierarchies and hierarchical conversations. So what is your take on that?
I just want to say that I am a very firm advocate of the morning meeting.
Yeah, I know that.
And reporters have always tried to dodge that meeting, but I have always insisted on it because that is the one interaction that, and all of us who have led newsrooms know that that's the one place, one point in day when you are actually, when you can set the news agenda, talk to people. So I'm a big votary of the morning meeting.
Thank you. मुकेश जी, आप बताएंगे कि ये पैंडेमिक और कोविड के टाइम आपके न्यूज़रूम की हालात कैसी थी, आपने कैसे मैनेज किया? क्योंकि भास्कर, मुकेश जी दैनिक भास्कर के स्टेट एडिटर हैं, एंड ऑल ऑफ अस नो दैट भास्कर्स हैव ह्यूज न्यूज़रूम्स.
तो हमारे यहाँ एटलीस्ट जो नॉन मेट्रो जो सिटीज़ हैं, चाहे वो दैनिक भास्कर हो या शायद कोई दूसरा मीडिया हाउस हो, कोविड के दौरान हमारे लिए न्यूज़रूम में कुछ बदला हो, मुझे नहीं लगता बहुत ज़्यादा कुछ बदला था. उसी तरह से फिज़िकली सब कुछ होता था, रिपोर्टर्स आते थे, मीटिंग्स होती थी सुबह की 11 बजे. बहुत सारे लोग संक्रमित हो गए, है ना, इन्फेक्टेड हो गए, फिर 7 दिन बाद वापस से ठीक होके फिर आ गए, फिर बैटल ग्राउंड में फिर जुट गए. तो जैसे जयपुर का हमारा न्यूज़ रूम, तो लगभग सारे लोग एक एक करके कोविड की चपेट में आते गए, फिर वापस लौट के आए और काम शुरू कर दिया. तो हमारे न्यूज़ रूम में ऐसा नहीं हुआ कि हाइब्रिड हो गया और ऑनलाइन भी हो रहा है, ऑफलाइन भी हो रहा है. तो सभी जगह, मतलब सारी हमारे जो सेंटर्स थे पूरे अक्रॉस इंडिया, सभी जगह ऐसा था. और जैसा आपने अभी मीनल से पूछा कि हमारे जो प्रमोटर्स हैं, क्या वो ऐसा चाहते हैं कि भाई हाइब्रिड हो जाए, या टीम की तरफ से कुछ ऐसा आया कि भाई अच्छा है, एक कंफर्ट है और वर्क फ्रॉम होम हो सकता है, या फील्ड में रिपोर्टर है वहाँ से बात हो सकती है. पर ऐसा नहीं है, ना तो प्रमोटर्स ऐसा पुश करते हैं कि भाई इस तरह से हो, ना रिपोर्टर्स की तरफ से ऐसा आता है. असल में जो न्यूज़ रूम का जो थ्रिल है, वहाँ चीज़ें जिस तरह से इवॉल्व होती हैं वो ऑनलाइन हो ही नहीं सकती. जैसे एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ कि उदयपुर में कुछ समय पहले एक घटना हुई कि एक व्यक्ति का गला काट दिया गया, और इस तरह की घटना पूरे देश में शायद पहली थी, सीरिया की तरह ऐसा कर दिया जाना. तो आमतौर पे क्या होता है कि कोई घटना होती है तो न्यूज़ रूम में एक गहमा गहमी शुरू हो जाती है कि इस घटना को कैसे कवर करना है, क्या करना है. पर ये ऐसी घटना थी जो अकल्पनीय थी, कभी सोचा नहीं था. तो उसमें सारे लोगों के कंधे झुक गए और सब लोग सब लोगों को लगा इसको रिपोर्ट ही कैसे करें या क्यों ही करें, इसको अखबार में कवर करें ही क्यों और कैसे करें। सब लोग बड़े हतोत्साहित हो गए कि यार राजस्थान में तो कल्पना नहीं कर सकते इस तरह की किसी घटना की। लेकिन क्योंकि वहाँ पे 10 लोग साथ थे हम लोग और एक जगह मौजूद थे, हम लोग ऑनलाइन नहीं थे कि कोई वर्क फ्रॉम होम कर रहा है, धीरे धीरे हम लोग जुटे, आपस में बात की और चीज़ें बढ़ती गई। और फिर हम लोगों ने कॉल लिया, हमारा जो हेडलाइन था वही हमारा कॉल था। हमने लिखा कि ये कोई मर्डर नहीं है, ये कोई हेट क्राइम नहीं है, ये आतंकवाद है, ये टेररिज्म है। क्योंकि उस दिन सारे नेताओं के बयान आ रहे थे, हिंदू मुस्लिम, टीवी तो चला ही चुका था कि ये ऐसा नफरत का माहौल शुरू हो चुका था। हम लोगों ने जब लिखा कि ये टेररिज्म है, गला काटने की इस तरह की घटना कोई आम हत्या या कोई हेट क्राइम नहीं है, अगले दिन से हमने देखा पूरा नैरेटिव चेंज हो गया और सारी दुनिया, हमारे मुख्यमंत्री, हमारा विपक्ष, सारे लोग कहने लगे ये टेररिज्म की एक घटना है। तो वो जो एक आशंका थी कि अगले दिन ऐसा ना हो कि उदयपुर में एक घटना हुई और फिर पूरे प्रदेश में, पूरे देश में शुरू हो जाए, वो नहीं हुआ। एटलीस्ट इस कारण से कि हम लोगों ने इसको एक और वो सारी चीज़ें क्यों निकली, क्योंकि हम लोग सब आपस में बात कर रहे थे, न्यूज़ रूम में ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग चल रही थी, जब पेज बन रहा था तो चीज़ें इवॉल्व हो रही थी। तो मेरा ये मानना है कि ना तो कोविड में ऐसा कुछ बदला था, कोविड में जो बदला था वो ये था कि पूरी दुनिया में करीब 2000 पत्रकारों की जान चली गई थी कोविड के दौरान। इंडिया में 474 जर्नलिस्ट मारे गए थे कोविड के इन सारी परिस्थितियों के कारण। तो हम लोगों ने बहुत कुछ खोया इस दौरान, लेकिन हमारा न्यूज़ रूम वैसा का वैसा है।
बहुत बढ़िया। और आपने बताया कि ये जो कॉन्वर्जेशंस वो एक बैकबोन है पत्रकारित्व के, कि और वो फिजिकल न्यूज़ रूम में ज़्यादा पॉसिबल हो सकता है। आप क्या मानते हैं कि फिजिकल न्यूज़ रूम ना होने के डाउनस्लाइड्स क्या है, उनके निगेटिविटीज़ क्या है फिजिकल न्यूज़ रूम ना होने की?
यही सबसे बड़ा कि वो जो संवाद है, वो जो बातचीत है वो नहीं हो पाती, और वो जो बहुत सारी चीज़ें इवॉल्व ही तभी होती है कि जब लगातार कम्युनिकेशन चलता है। खबर कोई उस तरह की नहीं है, कोई ऐसा प्रोडक्ट नहीं है कि आपने एक बार बना दिया और जारी कर दिया, लॉन्च कर दिया। ये चीज़ें धीरे धीरे डेवलप होती है, डेवलपिंग स्टोरी में धीरे धीरे चीज़ें जुड़ती चली जाती है, घटती चली जाती है। तो ये मेरे ख्याल से इस चीज़ का जवाब है।
और like this question is open to all of you, that do you think that there are news organizations which want to close down physical newsrooms or cut down physical newsroom, or really promote this concept of a hybrid newsroom because they want to cut costs?
I'm sure that there are large media houses which are mulling over this to cut costs. But I think as journalists, as editors, I think there will be, all of us will push back to some extent. Because journalism, I think it's not an isolated sport. It is a team effort, and unless the team is physically present, at least on most days, you need that, the adrenaline rush of being in a newsroom. You can't, it's not easy to replicate. And also with, Sankarshan was here earlier, and he was talking about this whole idea of people blocking access. So, with reporters not getting access to people, you need a kind of an editorial hand-holding, something that Naresh mentioned about training young journalists. All of that needs people to be physically present in the same newsroom. And I think most media organizations, much as they would like to cut costs, it's like, killing the golden goose. I mean, they also understand, especially the legacy media, will probably understand if there's a sufficient pushback from editors.
Okay. Naresh, since you have been with digital media, and of late I have also been a part of it, and we have been advocates of a hybrid newsroom. Can you please enlighten everyone about a model hybrid newsroom and how it functions and what are the advantages of a hybrid newsroom?
Well, I suppose a hybrid newsroom means that not everybody comes in every day. And I think that's the way a lot of us worked through the pandemic. We didn't go in at all for 2 years. I think it could be effective once you've got the team that is sort of glued together. And for a team to cohere, you have to be in the same space, as Meenal said. And these conversations, as Meenal pointed out, are not just about the news. They're about water cooler talk, these things that happen around the news, about the little things about your commute, what your child is doing in school. And those are the things that help a team understand each other. And once you've got that, then perhaps you don't need to come into the office every day, because journalism is also a very task-based activity. You need to file your story. You don't need to be in an office to file your story. And so I think it could work quite easily with some people coming in on some days. But you need to have these conversations regularly, almost every day, I would think. Everybody listening to everybody else, in order to be able to, for some people not to come in some days.
And मुकेश जी, आप क्या मानते हैं कि एक फिजिकल न्यूज़ रूम के लिए एक एडिटर होने की वजह से, with you and Meenal being editors of leading newspapers, do you think that a physical newsroom is worth fighting for?
बिल्कुल, क्योंकि मैंने जैसा बोला कि सारी खबर का सारा काम ही कन्वर्सेशन का है, बातचीत का है और डिस्कशन का है. बिना उसके पॉसिबल नहीं है, तो उसके लिए लड़ना ज़रूरी है. और बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल हैं हमारे पास कि अभी यहाँ पे राज्यसभा चुनाव चल रहे थे, पूरे देश में चल रहे थे, और राजस्थान में 4 सीटें थी जिनके लिए सारा झगड़ा था. तो हॉर्स ट्रेडिंग की सारी बातें चल रही थी. यहाँ के मुख्यमंत्री ने कहा कि भाई हॉर्स ट्रेडिंग तो अब एक सामान्य चीज़ है, होती है, हर पार्टी में होती है. और सारे नेता इस शब्द को, हॉर्स ट्रेडिंग वर्ड को लगातार बोले जा रहे थे. मतलब देखिए, नेता खुद के लिए एक तरह से इस शब्द का यूज कर रहे थे कि हॉर्स ट्रेडिंग हो रही है और वगैरह वगैरह. अब उसकी सारी खबरें, सब कुछ तो चल ही रही थी, वो उसमें कुछ नया नहीं था. लेकिन इस पूरे इशू में क्या नया करें, वो शायद उस न्यूज़ रूम में जब सारे लोग इकट्ठे हुए तो कुछ निकल के आया. हम लोगों ने एक एक्सपेरिमेंट किया, एक प्रयोग किया कि जो ह्यूमन इवोल्यूशन है, इंसान किस तरह से, इंसान का जो विकास था, क्रमिक विकास, वो किस तरह से हुआ कि वानर होते थे, बंदर होते थे, उससे फिर मानव बने. तो हम लोगों ने एक इस तरह का एक प्रयोग किया जिसमें एक वानर था, फिर वो मानव बना, फिर उनमें से कुछ लोग नेता बने और उनमें से कुछ लोग घोड़े बनने जा रहे हैं. तो ये एक तरह का प्रयोग किया था और ये प्रयोग बातचीत से निकला, न्यूज़ रूम की उस गहमा गहमी से, उस डिस्कशन से निकला. बहुत सारे लोगों ने बोला आपने घोड़ा बना दिया, गधा बनाना था, वो अलग बात थी. लेकिन इसलिए न्यूज़ रूम के लिए लड़ना चाहिए. मुझे जो लगता है कि ये सारी चीज़ें आप लगातार अपनी टीम से बात करते हैं, और एडिटर हैं, रिपोर्टर हैं, इवन हम लोगों के डिस्कशन में तो इतना खुलापन है कि सेल्स के लोग भी आते हैं और दूसरे लोग भी जुड़ जाते हैं, तो चीज़ें निकलती हैं.
आपने बहुत बढ़िया बोला. और there was one more point. I personally believe that team spirit gets enhanced when we are all in a physical newsroom, and especially for younger journalists, there has to be water around for the sponge to evolve. So I think a physical newsroom is quite an essential thing that large organizations, especially those who can afford it, it's a must. Before we open up the platform for more questions, I would want all of you to answer that, do you think in the modern era with so much technology around, physical newsrooms are really a bygone thing because technology can really connect. We have Zoom. Most of the young people these days don't even want to write down. They want to take notes on their phone or they want to record a conversation. And newsrooms are sort of places where, like, do you think newsrooms are going to be history soon enough? How do you view it?
So I just want to give one example here. For instance, reporters these days, very often the reporter will file the story on the phone, right? Now, seemingly it affords quick filing. It's good for online. You can quickly file and send. But how it is changing journalism is that invariably the stories are now just a collation of quotes rather than a narrative where you're actually telling a story for the reader. Now, so the reporter has done her or his job. She has just spoken to people, spoken to 4 people, and there are 4 quotes. Again, I'll say what Sankarshan said, कि किसी ने कहा बारिश बाहर हो रही है, किसी ने कहा बाहर sunlight है, and the reporter has quoted both people. And there is no context, providing no context. Now that is where real stories can actually be written, rewritten. We have all in our various capacities rewritten stories so that to make them better narratives. For all of this, there has to be a greater interaction between the news desk and the reporters, between the editor and the reporters. And that is how you sort of massage and a finished product or a finished story emerges. So you can have Zoom, you can have WhatsApp, everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will have the best possible story. And I think one of the problems that people in newspaper newsrooms are facing, that there's so much pressure to file quickly for online that you end up reacting all the time, and at a time when there's so much happening in the country that needs to be made sense of, you are actually only reacting and not sufficiently making sense of deeper, complex problems. And for all of this, I think the newsroom, the physical newsroom, is very important to sometimes just step back, debate, and to actually put out a well-contextualized story.
Thank you. We could take up some questions. Yes, please.
I have a question.
I think she's raising it
Sorry,
first,
please.
and then we could go ahead. Yeah. We could have about 3 questions, so.
My question is to Mukesh ji, of course. मुकेश जी, जब पैंडमिक था तो 2 खबरें थी भास्कर की जो बहुत ही ज़्यादा शायद इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे भी बहुत चर्चित रही. एक तो जो गवर्नमेंट ने आंकड़े छुपाए थे मौत के, और वो आपने दिखाया कि किस तरह से इतने सारे शव जल रहे हैं, और दूसरा ये कि वैक्सीन की वेस्टेज जो थी जिसकी वजह से बहुत से लोगों तक वैक्सीन नहीं पहुंच पा रही थी, तो जो शॉर्टेज का एक मिथ क्रिएट किया जा रहा था, एक नैरेटिव था, वो बहुत ही बुरी तरह से आपने खारिज करा अपनी खबरों के हिसाब से. और मेरा जो सवाल है वो इन 2 खबरों से बड़ा है, क्योंकि पैंडेमिक के टाइम पर एडवर्टाइजिंग एक बहुत बड़ा इशू रहा था सर्वाइवल के लिए, अखबार को चलाने के लिए, और आप लोग भी सरकार पे बहुत ज़्यादा निर्भर थे, उनके एड्स पे बहुत ज़्यादा निर्भर थे. तो क्या कोई कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन नहीं हुआ? क्या सरकार ने इसका कोई खामियाजा आपको नहीं भुगतना पड़ा इन टर्म्स ऑफ एडवर्टाइजमेंट्स दैट यू गॉट फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट? ठीक है. और एक छोटी सी चीज़ और, पैंडेमिक में क्योंकि सारी खबरें डराने वाली आ रही थी, बहुत सारी फेक न्यूज़ थी, बहुत सारा इन्फॉर्मेशन ओवरलोड था, तो क्या आपने कोई एक पॉजिटिव नरेटिव भी रखा अखबार के ज़रिए, जिससे कि लोगों को कोई एक उम्मीद दिखे कि नहीं इतनी बुरी, क्योंकि पैंडेमिक हम सबके लिए पहली बार था, ये पहला एक्सपीरियंस था बहुत से लोगों के लिए और डराने वाला था.
तो हम अलग अलग स्टेट्स में हैं और सभी जगह हम लोगों ने ये काफ़ी ये रिपोर्टिंग की कि जैसे राजस्थान में हम लोगों ने सभी सारे ज़िलों में करीब 500 हमारे जो कॉरेस्पोंडेंट थे, वो ब्यूरो चीफ, सभी को जितने शमशान घाट थे वहाँ पर भेजा और पता किया कि वास्तव में क्या मौतों का आंकड़ा उतना ही है जितना गहलोत सरकार बता रही है. पता चला कि उससे 20-30 गुना ज़्यादा डेथ हुई हैं। तो इस तरह से ये सच सामने आया और ऐसा सभी जगह हम लोगों ने किया था। बहुत सारे अलग अलग नैरेटिव बनाए जाते हैं, पर हमने एमपी में बीजेपी की गवर्नमेंट थी, यहाँ कांग्रेस की गवर्नमेंट है, अलग अलग स्टेट में अलग अलग पार्टियों की सरकारें हैं, सभी जगह हम लोगों ने ये सब किया। और जैसा प्रेरणा जी कह रही हैं कि रेवेन्यू और ये सारा अखबारों ने बहुत कुछ झेला इस दौरान, रेवेन्यू काफ़ी कम हुए और बहुत सारी सरकारों को भी ठीक नहीं लगा जब हम मौतों का सच जानने निकले और ये सारी दिक्कतें आई। जैसे आपने एक खबर का उल्लेख किया कि वैक्सीन की बर्बादी किस तरह से हो रही थी, वो हम लोगों ने हमारे साथियों ने वो एक्सपोज किया और उस सारी चीज़ों पे कहीं ना कहीं वही कि भाई कोविड के दौरान भी हमारे न्यूज़ रूम उसी तरह से चल रहे थे, तो ये पॉसिबल हो पाया। हाँ, वो आपका जो सवाल था कि भाई सरकार की तरफ से जब इस तरह से ये प्रेशर और ये सारी चीज़ें आई, यही सबसे बड़ी बात है कि इन सारी मुश्किलात के बीच हम लोगों ने सर्वाइव किया और उससे निकल के आए और अब शायद एक अच्छे दौर की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं। ये भी हुआ कोविड के दौरान कि जो डिजिटल मीडिया जिसको 5 साल बाद जहां आना था वो शायद 2-3 साल पहले आ गया है उस स्थिति में, तो वो एक चैलेंज है प्रिंट के लिए, अखबारों के लिए, और चैलेंज भी है लेकिन वो उसके साथ मिलके आगे भी बढ़ सकता है। तो ये बहुत सारी चीज़ें उस दौरान बदली।
I think we'll go with this person here for his question. And then because we are running out of time, I'm sure the speakers would be kind enough and you can ask them their questions outside so that we could begin the other session.
So
Yeah.
this question is mostly for Naresh because, this is a question about the IT rules. And while, so you run a digital only publication, of course, and the IT rules, which, I mean, for the context of the audience, it gives almost everybody on Twitter or anybody who has access to the internet to say that I have a problem with this news or opinion item. And then that complaint has to be necessarily dealt with by the publication, that you don't have an option to ignore it. And then there's an option of escalation to government authority and to another authority and finally to the ministry. And the ministry has powers to block the content without consulting the publication. Now, a lot of people are asking that, I mean, there's a sentiment that are physical newsrooms going to be a thing of the past? I want to ask, are digital newsrooms going to be a thing of the past? Because while, physical publication, they also have the a regime of regulation or free speech restrictions, to put it mildly, but the kind of, vagueness and the broad powers that are now, that digital only content is not being subjected to is quite something. Is there something that has seeped in your operations already? How are you thinking about this? Is it sustainable for you to deal with the scale of potential complaints? Just your thoughts.
We don't know what we're dealing with. So, I mean, the thing about the chilling effect is that you can choose to put on a blanket and not be cold. So you really, you have no idea what you're dealing with until you have to deal with it. You can't imagine the scenarios. But, I think it's a bit of an artificial distinction between print newsrooms and physical newsrooms. As Meenal said, they are all filing immediately for the internet. I imagine that most young people in this room are reading what we think of a newspaper actually is just another URL for them. And so this is a challenge that everybody faces, not just digital-only newsrooms, I think.
Thank you very much. And to add a line, I'm sure that all of us are open to regulations. We are just opposed to being stifled, So regulations, all of us would be fine if there are reasonable regulations. Thank you very much, Naresh, Meenal, and Mukesh, for this insightful session. And as I said earlier, that if I saw many hands being raised, please step out and ask your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for speaking on the challenges that the current domain is facing in these days. I am grateful for the patience and the confidence that you guys have shown here. Now I invite Anne from Indian Women Blogs to felicitate the award.